Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's teaser for the Art Life Find Your Way. So this is an online workshop that what happens is we meet on a monthly basis. I encourage people to come and go as they please. You could stay the whole time or you can dip in and out of the material. There's all sorts of different things that we offer, and I don't expect people to take all of the workshops or participate in everything. Again, it's there for you to dip in and out and look for the material and the things that are of interest to you and the techniques and ideas that you can apply towards a wide variety of creativity and art making. So today we're going to do a short demo with collage and painting, and I thought that I'd start by walking you through the supplies that you might want to gather. So as always, I want to encourage you to use what you have. If I end up suggesting something that you might not have, just try to substitute and do the best that you can. So I've got off camera, I have water in my water buckets, I have paper towel, I'm gonna move the camera so that you guys can see. Boop, 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 boop. Don't anybody get sick. All right. So I work on a glass cutting board as my palette. So I have my palette up here so that you guys can see the colors that I'm doing and using and all that jazz and how I mix things. I have a piece of what I call palette paper taped right here. And what this is it's just extra paper that you'll see me clean my brushes with. And I end up having a very large pile of these, and I make them into all sorts of different art pieces at the end of the year, books and mail art and all sorts of jazz. But I always recommend cleaning your brush on palette paper before you go to dip it into your water to clean it. It helps to get the excess paint off. It's also fun because you'll end up with basically an extra piece of art in the color palette that you use today. So these are the different things that you can start to think of as you're doing the work, how to continue making art and viewing things from all sorts of different perspectives. So what else I've got? Palette paper. I have my substrate. So I've spent basically the last year working in books that are about this size. And I've made a whole pile of these. I'll end up doing a couple flip through videos. But I go through and I have paintings and sketches and drawings and all sorts of things. And I gotta tell you, this is the first time that I've ever stuck to one size throughout the whole year. And I'm tired of this size. So I am working about this big. So it's what, like 9 by 12 on old file folders. So one of my lovely students gave us the idea in the workshop. That's what she's been working on, is just old file folders. So that's what I've been working on, or going to be working on in 2024. So that's my substrate to work on today. I'm going to start with collage. So I have something to glue on. I have something to glue with. I have a glue stick. So this is the Cocoina adhesive that I love so much. I have a rag. And then collage material. You don't need a whole bunch of stuff to be able to do this. What I like to do is last night I kind of just really quickly flipped through my collection of stuff. And just so you guys know, I'll talk about this more in depth in the class, I know many of you guys have heard me say this 50 million times. Anyway, I have a now bag, or a now box or a now container. And what I do is I rotate my collage stuff out according to the season. And so I'll flip through and kind of just gather the stuff that I want to work with right now. And I limit myself to what's in that container. I don't worry about sorting through everything else that I own. I just want to work with my now box. So last night I flipped through that and I just started pulling out things that I thought were interesting. That's what I'd like you guys to do today. Start looking through your collage stuff and just pick out a few things. You have the option of, if you want to use a focal image or a main image, you can. You can also paint one. So I started going through and just picking out different things that I thought would be interesting to just play with. And I was picking out the papers for different reasons. Some of it was because I like the images. Other pieces of paper might be because I wanted to play with painting on a different texture. Painting on top of handmade papers is very different than painting on top of glossy paper. The paint tends to soak or be absorbed by handmade paper versus something like a very glossy magazine page. The paint will sit on top of that. So I just kind of went through and I started pulling out and setting aside different images. And that's what I'd like you guys to do. Start by looking at your collection of collage material and maybe pick out like maybe one main image and then 3 or 4 different pieces of background paper. You could pick out things that you might not have any attachments to that you don't mind painting over. You could pick out images, textures, anything that just kind of pops into your head and looks interesting. So I'll set these aside. I'm going to encourage you not to use, don't worry about scissors today. So no fussy cutting. Just start by either tearing freehand or with a metal ruler. So like I said, I just picked out a few different things, even little scraps like this. And I'm going to set those aside and figure out how I want to use those. All right. And then I'll talk about my paints and all that jazz in a little bit. We'll get started with the collage. So when I go to start collaging, usually I have an idea in my head of something that I want to paint, something that I want to put on my page in some way. So I'm going to show you my sample that is a work in progress and that I'm using as inspiration for today, just to kind of give you an idea. Now, you do not have to paint this if you don't want to. One thing that you can do is when I go to start showing you how I painted my picture, as I say from Boston, my picture, I know how to say it, you could take these techniques and ideas that I'm giving you and apply them to your background papers. You could apply them to the papers around your focal image or a corner of the page. So when I'm giving you these painting prompts, we have these live paint sessions every Friday. Usually they're at 11. Sometimes they're different times, depends on the year. But for example, tomorrow we're going to be painting a little teacup, tea bag, and a spoon. And I go through and I talk about different things as we paint and give you different ideas. Before our Friday sessions, I give you sketch preps. I give all sorts of different exercises and ideas and techniques and things to think about leading up to our Friday sessions. Lately, for the last couple of months, we've been doing something that I like to call walking with a companion artist. So we've been studying the work of Cezanne and looking at and learning from, not just looking at, but looking and learning from other artists. So with Cezanne, we started by going through and looking at and focusing on his apples. So we would go through and we painted and sketched a wide variety, oh, that's a work in progress, wide variety of different things that inspired us thinking about Cezanne. This is, we had it that month. What we do is, so we have weekly Friday sessions. Then we also have a monthly 2-hour workshop. And for that month, we were painting our kitchen and what was around the dish, the sink and all that. And so we just kind of went through and talked about different ways of looking at and being inspired by other artists and learning from them. So not just taking their paintings, but like looking at their color palette, looking at their brushwork, and also their lives, as well as the other artists that have inspired and fed them. So Cezanne was November. This month it's been Fairfield Porter. And next month is going to be Edvard Munch, who I absolutely adore. So that's one of the things that we have been doing. Let's get back to the collage. All right. So this is what I want you guys to think about. When you go to start working on your substrate, most important thing with collage is to always glue down stuff that you like. Don't worry about covering the whole page. Don't worry about what's going to happen, but start by sorting through your stuff, picking out the things that you like, and then figuring out how you can glue them down. I often say that working with collage is almost like working with puzzle pieces, and you just have to figure out how to put all of these different puzzles together in certain ways. So sometimes I start with my backgrounds. Sometimes I might start with an image that could be, might not be, but could be a focal image. So what I like to do is I'll start by kind of moving the things around and figuring out which of these images do I have the most attachment to. So I picked out 3 possible main images that I wanted to use. And I'll start kind of holding them up against and moving them around the page and trying to figure out what really clicks to me. And so for me right now, I just feel like using the soft pink image. So I'm going to set that aside, put the other 2 things away. Don't worry about scissors today. Just tear with your hands. And I'm not going to think about my background papers just yet. So I don't want to spend all day stressing about this image. I'm going to figure out, I want it somewhere in or near the top left-hand corner of the page. Why? Because lately I've been gluing a lot of stuff down in the middle. So when you go to start gluing down your images, think about, where do you usually put your images? How can you place this image in a different place than what you normally do? It's just kind of interesting, all these different guidelines and things that we start to set up for ourselves. And the more you do the work, and the work could be anything, it could be collage, it could be paint, it could be anything, that you realize that there's an infinite number of possibilities. And it's all about exploring and learning the what ifs. What about doing it this way? What about doing it that way? What if, what if, what if? So try to think about that as you start to collage, paint, whatever medium of choice you've got. So you just saw me stick the glue. I covered the back of my paper completely with my adhesive. I'm using my Italian glue stick, Cocoina. Yeah, I know, after all these years, I still can't say it right, but I love it. In my opinion, it's the best glue stick. But again, I want to strongly emphasize, use what you got, use what you have access to, and use what you like. So notice that what I like to do is I'm going to go through and burnish and get rid of any bubbles and wrinkles. I also like to get rid of any excess glue. Notice that I'm trying not to overthink or stress or worry or basically rush it through. I want to enjoy the process. I want to be mindful and just start to explore the different possibilities. Oh, one thing I would encourage you guys to do too is, I personally like to take work in progress photos. So that way you can see how the work evolves and changes with each and every layer that you put down and all of the different decisions that you make. So just kind of keep that in mind as you go through. Take work in progress photos. I always find them helpful. So again, I'm going to start by moving my pieces around. One thing that I don't like is if I have excess white on paper like this, or maybe magazine advertisements, anything that I don't need, I'll get rid of. So just very quickly tearing it away. Again, not worrying about fussy cutting anything. So starting by kind of moving and almost auditioning these different elements, figuring out how can I use this main image, and then maybe, like I said, 3 or 4 different pieces of background papers. So one thing that I love this text, but I also really love the marks right here. So I want to incorporate those in some way. I like this image of little houses in Paris. So again, I want to try to figure out how to use that in some way. And then same thing with this handmade paper that I know is going to be very interesting when I go to start painting it. So start by figuring out which of these papers you want to use. Keep in mind that you don't have to cover the entire page. You can let some of your substrate peek through. So again, I'm just going to start by moving this around, figuring out where I want things, how much of it I want. I could save these other little scraps that I'm tearing off for something later on. So set those aside. I might end up gluing a fourth piece. I had this out yesterday, this little film strip or photo strip, and I really like that. So we'll see if I end up using that. But see how you start kind of moving the papers around and thinking, well, what if? What if I hold it here? Notice that every time you start moving these papers around, you're going to get a totally different look and feel for your page. And it's not that one is better than the other, it's just different. So don't just glue stuff down. Take a minute to just kind of move things around and decide, okay, do I want this on top? Do I want it behind? Try to be mindful, but at the same time, don't overthink it too much. And then once you've figured it out, embrace it. It'll be okay. Again, start gluing. And there's all sorts of different adhesives that you guys could use. Some people might like gel medium, other people might like the Scotch permanent glue sticks, Tombow, Avery, PVA, the list goes on and on and on. All sorts of different things. Most important thing, as always, is find an adhesive that you like and stick with it. All right, so I'm going to stick this down. I always also think too, the burnishing really helps, not just to get the excess adhesive off and to make sure that you have no bubbles and wrinkles, but sometimes when you go to start layering acrylics, it can help so that your paper is somewhat flat, and it sometimes can help to avoid getting bubbles and wrinkles. Sometimes. Oops. So again, you'll have a main image and then maybe at least 3 to 4 little snippets of things in and around the page. And like I was saying before, you don't have to cover the whole page. So I'm just kind of going through, moving stuff, sticking it down. I'm making a very blocky collage today, which is unusual for me, but I know that I'm going to end up painting over this in some way, so it shall be interesting. And that's the other thing too. It's, part of the process, especially if you're thinking about introducing paint, is being open to new discoveries and new possibilities. It's what I sometimes call pushing and pulling, where you're putting down these added layers, and the layers could be collage papers, it could be paint, it could be pen work, pencil, all sorts of different things. But trying to figure out how you can make what might be in your head, and how you can kind of unravel, evolve, and spill sometimes on the pages, how you can bring out what's inside. And sometimes you don't know until you start doing the work. And sometimes something that's in your head ends up getting pushed in a different direction because you add a new layer of something. So be open to different possibilities, different ways of working. Embrace the happy accidents. That's Usually the accidents are what starts to make your work more interesting. It'll push you in a different direction and it gets you out of your comfort zone. And that can be a very good thing. So, like I said, try to get to the point where you have 3 to 4 bits and pieces in and around the page, a main image. I'd encourage you to take a work in progress photo so that later on you can see how this starts to evolve and change with your next layers. So before we go any further, let me know if anybody has any questions or anything that they need to share. Get off their chests. Guys, all good so far? I'm going to get all the glue off my fingers. And then I'm going to walk you through the paints that I'm going to be using in the supplies. And the thing to really think about and remember is that there's always several different ways that you can make the work. And it's all about opening yourself up to new possibilities and different ideas. One thing I'm going to strongly encourage you to do today, when you go to start painting, get the largest size brush that you can. All right. So I am using a number 10 round brush. Maybe you have a 1-inch bristle brush. Maybe you have a large flat brush. Just try to use the biggest brush. In other words, don't use your little brushes. No fussy brushes. Get a big brush. One brush. And then my colors that I'm going to be using, I have titanium white, quinacridone magenta, Payne's gray, quinacridone gold, ultramarine blue, raw sienna, and then a couple of other things that I've got. I have a barrier cream. I put this stuff on my hands before I go to paint, and then I put more of it on my hands before I go to wash my hands. It helps to protect your skin, but it also makes for a nice, easy cleanup. So I've got a barrier cream. I also have a palette knife for scooping out my paints. And then, like I was saying before, I have a bunch of shop towels. I love these blue shop towels. These are so worth the money. My little trick is when I'm done with a paint session, I open them up and let them dry like this on my table, and you can use them again and again and again. So thank you, you know who, for introducing me to these and encouraging me to use these as opposed to the white towels. So when you go to start picking out the paints and the colors you want to use, you'll notice that my paints are what are called a heavy body acrylic. So they're a thicker acrylic than, say, the fluid, more liquid-like acrylics. Use what you already have, use what you have access to, use what you like. This is what I like. So I would like you to try to have some colors that you want to use, as well as some mixing colors, and then what I call a sketch color. So let me run through that real quick. My mixing colors, titanium white and Payne's gray. I like using Payne's gray as opposed to black. You get a broader range of color mixes. So my mixing colors are usually the titanium white and Payne's gray. My sketch color, what I do is you'll see me go through and I'll sketch whatever the shape is or the subject using some sort of light brownish color most of the time. And that's the raw sienna. So maybe you don't have raw sienna, but you have burnt sienna, you have yellow ochre. Use what you got again. And then my colors that I'm going to end up using on this page today are going to be the quin magenta, quin gold, and ultramarine blue. Your miles may vary, but what I would encourage you to do is try to limit your palette. Don't feel that you have to pull out every single color of the rainbow. When you look at my palette, you have the two mixing colors, and then you basically have the Quin Magenta is my red, the Quin Gold is my yellow, and the Ultramarine Blue is my blue. So I can get a very broad range of color mixes just with a limited palette. So again, just different things to think about. So I'm going to start by squeezing out some of these colors and scooping things out. Does anyone have any questions about palettes, colors, choices? I usually start by squeezing out my sketching color. So again, my sketching color is the raw sienna. I don't like to mix water with my paint at all. I like to use my paint as is. So that's something that you'll see me do in a second. I'm just throwing the barrier cream on my hands again. All right. One of the things that we've been doing in the Art Life is I'm encouraging people to look around their homes and look at different things for inspiration. I'm going to move the camera for a second so nobody gets sick. So I started cleaning up my little art area yesterday. And back in January of 2020, maybe it was February, I bought this picture at a local thrift store and I absolutely loved it. $10 picture. I saw it. I said to my mother, I'm going to paint that. She's like, you're going to paint that? I'm like, no, I don't mean that I'm going to paint it. I mean, I'm going to paint it. So I have been painting this picture over and over and over again. I just thought it was interesting. I love the shape of it. I love the color of it. I just thought it was fun. I'm going to move the camera back again. So we all have different things around our home in our lives that we find interesting. And there's always an abundance of things, not just to paint, but it's all about how you start to see things and what's important to you and what you want to learn and how you can take these ideas of stuff that's around us every day and turn them into art of some sort. You know, maybe it's something in your house that inspires you color palette wise or texture wise. You know, there's all sorts of different ways of looking. And that's one of the things I really want to encourage you to do. The more you do the work, it will really help you to grow as an artist. It helps to open your eyes. But also, a big part is spending time looking at things and thinking about things. So I'm going to start by sketching my little picture. And this is one of the things I don't want you to do. I don't want you to hold your brush like this. All right? It's not a pencil. I want you to pull your hand back and you could hold it like this. You can hold it like this. You can hold it in all sorts of different ways, but try not to do this. And this is one of the reasons why I want you to use a big brush and pull your hand back, because we are doing a painting, all right? We're not doing a sketch. You're not a camera, all right? So try to remember that when you go to start doing the work, embrace your brush strokes, embrace the marks that you make. So I'm going to start by loading up my brush with the raw sienna, my sketching color. And again, my brush is dry. I don't like to have any water on it. I do just want to make sure that I have enough paint as I'm picking it up. All right. So I'm backing up. And what I usually like to do is I start by thinking about what I'm looking at in terms of a basic shape. So whatever your largest shapes are, don't start by thinking, okay, I'm going to go in, I'm going to paint a picture, I'm going to paint this, I'm going to paint that. Start to think of things in terms of shapes. So when you start looking at the top of the picture, it's almost like this oval shape. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to push down on my brush and I'm going to make a mark like this. And then I'm going to make another mark like that. So I'm almost making this eye or oval type shape. And you'll get very different looks going in and pushing down on your bristles like this, right? Let me load up my brush again. So looks like this versus using the side of your brush or even barely touching the substrate. So there's lots of different ways to start painting, up and down, back and forth, scrubbing, all sorts of different things. So keep that in mind. Notice that, again, you get different looks depending upon how you hold your brush. So, like I said, I started by taking my brush and making almost like this oval type shape and then filling it in. Now, if I don't end up covering everything completely, see how I have that little white space right there? I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to add layers of paint later on. I'm going to add more paint, and I'm going to think about the side. So the side ends up looking like this line that goes down and starts to get curved on both sides. I'm going in and just adding this thick line on the left and the right, not thinking about the handle just yet, thinking about where I want it sitting on my table. You could pull it all the way down. I'm just going to have it go maybe like that. This middle area, this is up to you. When you go to start doing your sketch with paint, you could leave this open, or you can maybe just kind of very quickly throw a thin layer of color on it. Now, one thing about sketching with paint is you get a different look depending upon later on what your base coat color is, all right? What might be called an underpainting. That can be interesting to play with, playing around with the colors that you put down as base coats and then colors that you put on top of it later on. So again, just something to think about. And then my handle. This is what I like to do with my handle. I'm going to load up my brush. Notice that when I go to start, I'm going in a little bit on the right-hand side like this. I'm not going on the outside. Going in just a little bit. I'm going to take my brush, twist it around, and pull it down like this. The more you sit and play with your brush and you play with the different possibilities and you ask yourself, what if? What if when I go to make my marks, I start to say, I'm going to take my handle, take my brush, and go like that. What kind of a look can I get? What if I take my brush, push down, go in and twist it? I would encourage you to get a piece of scrap paper. It can be like a brown paper bag, it can be Tyvek envelopes, and just play with your brush strokes. See what happens when you go in and just start making different marks. And don't be afraid to make a mark. If you don't like it, you can always paint over it. So you could leave your paper like this. You could also say, well, what if I go in and use some of this original sketching color, just maybe in and around the page in a few areas, just so that my page isn't so, stark white or off-white. So it's just kind of interesting. I usually like to I'll use up my paint like this on my palette paper. So I'm going to wipe off all of this excess paint on my brush, and then I'm going to give my brush a bath. And when I go to clean my brush, first of all, I don't fill my water up all the way. I usually fill it up to about here. I bang the bristles so that when I'm banging the bristles, I'm not splaying them. I'm just kind of going like this along the bottom, kind of back and forth. I also swish it around, and I'll wipe off any excess water on the lip of the jar like this. And then you'll see me with either my blue shop towels or whatever I've got, a rag. I wipe off all the excess paint like this. So I'm wiping off the excess paint. I'm cleaning my brush. I'm also drying it. I will use that water until it is disgustingly gray. I use it again and again and again. Usually, like after the third day when it starts to stink, I'll clean it out. One thing you do not want to do, don't ever dump paint water down your drain. You will mess up your pipes big time. I taught at all sorts of different mixed media and rubber stamp and all sorts of different stores for more than 25 years. And I can't tell you how many of them had messed up pipes because people would pour paint water down the drain. So what I usually will do is I'll take my paper towels and I'll save my paint paper towels and I'll take a whole bunch of these and I'll throw them into my dirty paint water. And then the paper towels will absorb the paint water. I toss the paper towels, clean up with another paper towel, my little water bucket, and then I just fill it up again. So don't dump paint water down the drain. Start by thinking about the colors that you want to start scooping out. So I have titanium white. I'm going to add some Payne's gray. So I got my mixing colors. And then my 3 additional colors, which are going to be the Quin Magenta, Ultramarine Blue, and Quin Gold. When you start thinking about colors and what colors to put together, always remember there's an infinite number of possibilities, but sometimes it can be overwhelming not knowing where to start or what to start with. That's one of the many reasons why limiting your palette and limiting what you have access to, limit your palette, limit your tools. It not only can make it less scary, but also you can end up with a very broad range of colors and different possibilities. So just kind of keep that in mind, that actually by limiting your choices, you're giving yourself more freedom. So just something to think about. All right, so I squeezed out my colors. Another thing that I would encourage you to do, don't use a heat gun or hair dryer to speed up the drying time. What happens with those things is that it just kind of dries the paint on the top. If you use a heat gun, especially like the Milwaukee's, it can actually cook the paint on the top, and you don't want that. So I'll either take a paper towel or an excess piece of paper, and I'll pull prints. Sometimes I like to work wet on wet too, so I might not even wait sometimes for these things to dry, my layers to dry. I like to see, what different possibilities I can create. But sometimes I might want to speed up the drying time. I'll do it this way. So I'll just keep pulling a print and moving my paper in different areas. So again, just something to keep in mind. When you go to start, what I would encourage you to do, if you haven't already done so, one is take a work in progress photo so that you can see what it looks like so far. The other thing is a lot of the times we're working like this and everything's right in front of us. Back up, get away from it, all right? And the third thing is, don't beat yourself up over your marks that you're making, over your paint layers, over any of this, especially if this is new to you. So one of the many benefits of working with a companion artist, like I was saying before, thinking and looking at the work of Cezanne and Fairfield Porter and Edvard Munch and all these different people, is that you can look to artists of the past and see what they've done. You can learn from them as to how they've solved problems. But you can also look to them and realize, I'm making a painting. There's so many different ways of painting, and we really need to remember that when we go to start to do the work. Because I think a lot of the time what happens is that people get it in their head that they have to know already how to do this, right? And we beat ourselves up because we go to make a mark or we go to make a layer and it doesn't look like whatever is in our head. We carry all sorts of different baggage with us. And it's just something that you really, really need to realize that the more you do the work, not only will you learn a whole variety of different things, but you also build confidence. And I always think that the confidence is the most important aspect of art making. If you've got confidence, you can do whatever you want. I was talking, I'll start painting in a second. I'll tell you the story in a second. So, one of the things I would like you guys to think about when you go to start doing your first paint layer is instead of painting the object, start to paint around it. So I'm going to start with one of my original colors. So I'm going to have my quinacridone magenta, and I'll probably I'm going to pick up a little bit of white. So start by picking up some of the white, loading up my brush with the white, and then picking up some of the quin magenta. Now, keep in mind, you get a different look if you're to go through and mix up your color like this and really mix it in versus dipping your brush in and out of your little piles of color and mixing them and painting them on your page. So just kind of keep that in mind as you go through and start doing your layers. The other thing is that you don't have to paint over anything you don't want to paint over. So keep that in mind too. Maybe you want to start to paint around things, or maybe you want to play with your layers. So one thing to realize is, and you'll realize this when you start to do the work, a lot of the colors that I picked out are transparent colors, means you can see through them. But if you start mixing them with some of the other colors like the white, that's going to make it opaque. You mix it with the Payne's gray, it's going to make it darker. That also makes it a little bit more opaque. So different things to think about as you go to start to do the work is how much of my background do I want peeking through and how do I want that to peek through? So think about this stuff before you make a mark. If you don't know what this is going to look like before you put it on your page, test it on some scrap paper. Take one of your collage images that you don't have any attachments to and just paint over it and see what it looks like. See what the colors are. See how it interacts with the papers that are behind it. All right. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to load up my brush, and I'm going to start painting in and around my main image. And for me, my main image right now is going to be this picture. So think about as you go to start making your marks, how thick, how thin you want to put the paint on the page. One thing that I sometimes like to do is I'm painting back and forth. So I'm going back and forth with my brush, not picking up any more color just yet, and seeing the different marks I can make until I've got hardly any paint left on the brush. So one of the things I was talking about a few minutes ago is working with and thinking about a companion artist and not just looking at their work, but learning about their life and how they were able to make the work that they made. So one of the artists that we've been talking about in the art life is Paul Cézanne. Cézanne was a French artist, and like many artists, he struggled with, I'm not going to give you his whole story, but he basically struggled with how to make a living, and he was subsidized from his parents. He was subsidized with a few of his friends. And that went on for a long time until what happened was that his father ended up dying, and his father left him all his money. And what happened was with that is that Cezanne at that point, he had the ability, because he didn't have to worry about bills, he didn't have to worry about a lot of things anymore. He had the ability to make the work that he wanted to. He didn't have to worry about what a lot of the other artists had to worry about, which was selling their work or displaying or exhibiting their work in salons. He could go through, make whatever he wanted, and play until kingdom come. And it was basically the same thing with Edvard Munch. That's something that I don't think a lot of people think about or realize with painting. We sit and we think that these artists, they're geniuses from the get-go. They do everything right from the start. And we don't realize that there's a lot of things in play, a lot of things that are important factors in the artist's lives. Start looking at the early work, especially the sketches of Van Gogh, and you realize it's not talent. It's another thing that you hear a lot of people say, "Oh, you're so talented. They're so talented." Art making is a skill, and it's a skill that can be learned. It just takes time, practice, and building up that confidence. So notice that I'm going in and starting to paint in and around my picture. You'll see how, and hopefully you'll experience on your own, when you start painting, that these different paints absorb the papers in different ways. So the glossy paper, the paint sits on the top of it. The handmade paper, paint gets absorbed. So note what happens when you start painting on collage materials. One thing sometimes, so I'm painting on top of an old file folder. And right here, I get a couple little bubbles and wrinkles on whatever this label was. Now, I don't care about this label. I can paint over it later on. But just to give you an example, where sometimes if you get bubbles and wrinkles, my trick is I'll take a dry paper towel and I just kind of rock my finger back and forth. And hopefully it's enough that will push out any little air bubbles. So keep that in mind. If you end up getting little bubbles and wrinkles, don't freak out. Sometimes just embrace the texture and just remember it'll be okay. But if it drives you a little bonkers, take a paper towel and just kind of rock your finger back and forth and push down. So as you go in and start to do the layers, think about where you want to add the paint, what you want to mix with it, different kinds of brush strokes that you can make. Watch to see how the paint reacts with the collage papers, but also, try to figure out, do I want to use the color as is? Do I want to mix it with white? Do I want to mix it with another color? Be open to different possibilities. I'm going in and starting to paint out some of my collage papers because I don't necessarily want all of them here. And it's one of those things where as you do the work, that's when you start to realize what you like. Sometimes we get this idea in our head, it's going to look a certain way, and we have to just embrace different possibilities. So see how I'm just kind of going in and around. I haven't cleaned my brush yet. So I'm just kind of picking up some more of the Quin Magenta and just doing a couple of quick brush strokes here and there. Now, one thing that I would encourage you to do is, like I said, play with not just your brush strokes, but mixing your colors. What if I don't clean my brush and I just pick up some more white and then I pick up a little bit more Quin Magenta, and maybe in a few spots I can go in and just scrub, scrape, brush this lighter color or a different color in and around the page. Be open to different experiments. Ask yourself, well, what if? And I'm not waiting for this layer to dry at all. I'm just kind of very quickly going in and adding some of this lighter color in a few different areas here and there. All right. Now, I don't know if I'm going to like this and just leave it alone, but I don't know until I start doing the work. So I'm going to put this color down. I'm going to clean up my brush, and I'm going to add another layer. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm not even going to dip it in the water. just going to wipe off a lot of excess paint. I'm going to pick up some white, and I'm going to pick up some Payne's gray. I'm going to mix it up so I get this light gray color. Maybe I'll pick up a little bit of my blue. And then underneath the picture, I'm just going to go in very quickly. Now I'm getting this neutral, very neutral, interesting purple, and that's because my brush had some of the Quin Magenta on it. And this is what I like about working with a limited palette. You know, I start getting these interesting color combinations because I don't always clean my brush, or I mix my brush with certain colors, but I'm just kind of going in and around and adding a thin layer of color in and around the bottom of the picture. Just like with the handle, this paint layer is down here, and then it comes slightly up so that my picture is actually sitting on the table and not just sitting on this line of paint. So just kind of going in very quickly and adding a little bit of color. I'm going to clean my brush. I'm actually going to clean it completely. I would encourage you, again, if you haven't done so, take a work in progress photo so you can see how it evolves and changes. You know, what's really fun is that, keep in mind with collage, you can get all sorts of different possibilities depending upon the kinds of paint that you're using on top, the kinds of brush strokes. If you paint over things with transparent paints versus opaque paints, you know, if you decide to paint around things like I did with the flowers up here, you really have to play with your marks, play with the different possibilities, and just be open to it. And realize that, you know, you can't be afraid to paint over some of your collage materials. You know, it's all part of the learning process. So I cleaned all the paint off my brush. And then just so you guys know, we're probably going to go over the 1 hour mark within the next few minutes. So if at any point anybody has to leave, I will have a recording of this later on. And then you guys can always email me and ask me any questions. So I've got my brush. I'm going to go in and start to paint my picture. I want to make sure that as I go to do this, I start picking up enough paint. I want to think about the colors. So remember that with your ability as an artist, you don't have to paint. You don't have to always put in every single thing that you see. You can edit things. You can change things. You're an artist. You know, you want to paint a tiger that's pink with purple polka dots. You can do that. So just remember, you don't have to make it look exactly as whatever it is you're looking at. You know, I'm not a hyper realist painter. I like to be painterly. I like to have fun with it. I don't need to have an exact reproduction of what it is I'm looking at. So I'm going to think about the darkest areas as I go to start putting my colors down. And my dark areas to start are going to be in the center of the picture up here. So I'm going to start by picking up a little bit of white because I want to make it gray. So some white, some of my Payne's gray. I'm going to mix this up. And then maybe because I don't need that much color, maybe wipe it off somewhere else on my palette. I'm going to pick up some of my ultramarine blue. And I'm going to mix this into what I always call my little puddle pile of color. Now, before I go to put color on my substrate, what I like to do is I'll wipe it off on my test paper and my palette paper. That way I can see what the color looks like and if I like the look of it and the direction that I'm going in. And if not, I can pick up more of one of the other colors. So I can pick up some more of my ultramarine blue. See how it looks a little different with the ultramarine blue? I could even pick up a little bit more of the Payne's Gray. And I noticed that I just picked up a lot of Payne's Gray, so that's going to be, well, that's kind of interesting. I like that. I like the fact that it's this neutral blue-gray color. So play with, before you put them on your substrate, play with just wiping them on your palette paper, see what it looks like. You can also play with your brush strokes that way. You know, that's another benefit of having this excess paper here. So I'm going to load up my brush. I'm going to back my hand up so I'm not too fussy with it. And I'm just going to make a mark. So I'm going to go in, push down, make a mark like this. Not loading up my brush again. I picked up enough paint, going in, turning it and twisting it. And then I'm going to fill in the middle like this. So start to make the marks. If you don't end up covering it completely, don't get fussy with it. You know, think what happens when you go in and put down a mark and leave it alone. All right. So I'm going to clean my brush. And I'm not gonna give it a bath. I'm just gonna wipe it down like this. And this time what I'm gonna do is I want a lot more white and some of the ultramarine blue. I'm gonna mix it up. So you'll see me move my little piles of color around a lot. And I wanna think about what color do I want that to look like? Do I want it to be a little bit darker? So do I want to add more blue to it? Or do I want to add more white to it? You know, think about the different possibilities. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to make a mark around the outside like this. I'm going to see what happens because I don't know if I twist my brush and keep turning it and moving it down and around like that. Then I can move the wet paint around again. So sometimes it's fun to play the what if game where it's like, I don't know how much paint I have in my brush. Let's see what happens if I keep twisting and turning it. And I love that mark that I just made, so I'm going to leave it. You know, art making is not about the finished product. It's about the process and what happens with the evolution. One of my favorite artists is Enrique Martinez Celaya. And one of his quotes is like, you know, if you have to figure out as someone who's been studying collage, painting, whatever, for an extensive period of time, you know, what's the point in making it if you already know what it's going to look like when it's finished? You know, you want it to be part of the process. You want to be able to discover new things as you put paper to paper, paint to paper, pencil to paper. You start making all these different marks. So what's the point of doing any of this if you know what it's going to look like, if you know what it's going to be? Embrace the discoveries, embrace your marks, embrace happy accidents. And that's me with a whole lot of paraphrasing him. All right. So I picked up more of this color and I'm going to go in and push down again. And then what if I just kind of go back and forth with my brush like this? So see how I'm not worried about finishing the bottom. You know, I'll pick up more paint as I need to, and I have enough of this color right here, so I don't have to worry about making more of it. Just kind of going back and forth with my brush, not thinking that I have to cover everything over. I can leave some of my background peeking through in certain areas. What if I take my paintbrush and I push down hard like this at the top, make a mark, take more of the color. Maybe I'll do the same thing at the bottom. Oops. Make a little mark like that. But I'm not going to worry about filling in all of my gaps. You know, think about when you start to look at what you've done, do you like the texture peeking through? And if you do, leave it. If you don't, throw more paint on it. So I'm going to pick up some more of this color. I'm going to take my brush. I'm going to go in like this, turn it, twist it, and go down and make the handle. I can pick up more color and go back over it like that. I don't have to clean my brush. I can maybe, sometimes you'll see me just wipe it down like this. It's almost like I'm just trying to keep it activated so it doesn't dry. What happens if I pick up some more of my blue and I have the white already on my brush? What if I pick up a little bit more of the Payne's gray and I think about some of my dark areas? Another thing you'll see me do is, so I'm working with a number 10 round brush. You'll see me sometimes kind of flatten the head of the brush like that. So, because again, I can get different looks depending upon how I hold my brush. And I just realized I think this is a little bit more, oh, there we go. All right, a little bit more gray than blue, but no, we're good. So I can go in and add another layer, another interesting mark or texture to my painting. So as you go to start to build up your painting and build up your colors and your layers, think about what you want to add. How much painting do you want to do? Do you want to cover over everything? Do you need to cover over everything? Can you go in and start figuring out and thinking about your collage material, pulling things back out? So I had started to paint over and around these flowers, but now I'm thinking they're almost distracting. There was several different things I could do. I could put a transparent color and let them peek through the background. I could take the idea of these flowers and paint this flower somewhere on this page. I could paint it coming out of the picture. I could paint it on the picture. I could paint it down and around the bottom of the picture. So there's different possibilities. Sometimes your collage material ends up getting painted over completely, and you have to embrace that. You have to be open to these different happy accidents that start to occur during the process. And you have to be open to new discoveries. And it's one of those things where you don't know what's going to happen until you start doing the work. So keep that in mind with the process. Don't get too attached to the stuff that you're gluing down. And remember that there's always ways of pulling things back out. That's why I really encourage you to take the work in progress photos, because you could use these, you can use these as inspiration for additional painting subjects. Does that make sense? You could also use them as ideas for color palettes. You could use them as ideas for textures. So you might end up painting over everything that you collage, but there's still benefit and value and worth in starting with the collage background. Not only can it give you the springboard for different ideas, but just like you can see here and over here, it can start to give you different textures. And these are textures that you wouldn't get if you just started with a blank substrate. So that's just something to think about. So I am cleaning all this paint off of my brush. I'm thinking about the marks that I made and what I want to do. And like I was saying earlier, I like this flower. I just don't know if I necessarily need it there. I could leave it there. I could paint over it. I could add it again. Well, let's do that. Let's do this. So I'm going to take just some Quin Magenta very quickly. Oh, another thing you'll see me do is I always work with a shop towel in my hand. So if I end up getting paint somewhere where I don't want it, I can wipe it right off. So just kind of very quickly go in and paint over some of this. I like the texture that I'm making with the brush stroke, so I'm just kind of trying to figure out how I can make more of that. All right, so I'm going to clean my brush again. Now, I could leave this as is. You could walk away from it And that sometimes can be a good thing to do. If you start to get to the point where you're struggling with the marks that you've made and the things that you've done, and you don't know what you want to do next, just walk away, leave it alone, come back to it later on. It can also help to turn it around from different perspectives so that every time you're looking at it, you're seeing not just what it is you're painting, but you're seeing the different shapes and the different colors. Also, too, just walking across the room and coming back to it or looking at it from across the room, that also can be a very big help. So, lots of different ways of approaching how we see the work that we've done. But definitely, if you've been looking at it for a half an hour or an hour, it's always helpful to get up and get away from it and come back to it later on. So, I could go in and I could paint another flower. Maybe I want to pull out some more collage material and I could start collaging other things in and around my picture or on top of my picture. Think about the different possibilities. I'm going to go in and I want to add a few different things. Use up some of my paint. So I'm going to play the what if game. I didn't plan this ahead of time. What if I pick up some of the ultramarine blue and I pick up some of my Quin magenta. And I have this area right here where the table meets the wall. What if I go in and just add a little bit of this dark color? I can take some paper towel and wipe it down. So see how I start with my brush is really thick with paint. And I go in, I just kind of wipe it back and forth in and around here like this and make a mark. And then I take my paper towel and I just pull the color down in and around and kind of soften it. So see how that changes the look of it. And like I said before, you don't always know until you go to do the work. So try it, see if you like the look of it. And I like that. I rarely use purple in my work. So it can be interesting to introduce new colors, new marks. I want to kind of soften this line a little bit. But see how there's different possibilities and they all start to come forward as you're going through and problem solving and asking yourself these different questions. So, and again, that's part of the process. That's part of basically finding your way, doing the work and asking yourself, well, I don't know what's going to happen. So what if I try it this way? What if I do it that way? And remember, you can always add additional layers later on. This doesn't have to be finished today. One of the things that's interesting, the many things that's interesting about Munch is that when he died, I think he had like 25,000 pieces of work. It was an abundance of work. And he ran out of places to put them. So he had them in the house, he had them in the barn. They were everywhere. But they were in different, some of them were in different stages. And some of them, you might look at them and clearly think that they were finished, and others not so much. So don't feel that you have to finish the work right now. You can always come back to it later on. And everybody works in a different way. For you, this might be done. For somebody else, they might want to add something else. So think about the different possibilities. So I don't know, I'm still torn. I could go in and add the flower, keep thinking about maybe adding it up here, but I don't know. I can also put it down here. I can also say I'll come back to it another day. So before it gets any later, because I know it's going on 2:20, I'm going to clean my brush and tell you one last thing before I go to do this. When I have an abundance of paint, like I've got up here, what you'll see me do is I'll take my palette paper and I'll switch from a brush to either a palette knife, a catalyst tool, a paper towel, and I'll start picking up these colors and going in and doing stuff like this on my palette paper and using up what I've got. And I'll pull this down and I'll paint both sides. I let it dry and I end up with another freshly painted piece of paper that I can turn into art. You could also, if you have a paint session and you have to walk away because maybe you need more tea. Just take some spritzer with water and just very gently mist your paint, and that will keep it activated and fresh for a little bit. So, this is just a small taste of some of the many different things that we do in the art life on a regular basis. And I'm going to move the camera. I can't believe how fast that went. Does anybody have any questions, or does anyone want to share anything before I shut the recording off? If later on you have questions and you want to talk to me more about what's in the art life, what we do, you can. You've got my email. You can always get in contact with me. But again, just to kind of do a little refresher, we have live painting sessions every Friday. They're usually from 11 to 12 Pacific Standard Time or Daylight Time, depending on the time of the year. I record everything. The only thing that I don't record is twice a month, we have 2 salons. And the salons are 2 hours each, and they're a great way to interact and have fun with people from all over the world. We share artwork, we ask questions. Maybe you want to talk about or ask questions about a certain art supply, or how you set up your palette, or how you arrange your studio. We share all sorts of different things. So we have 2 2-hour salons every month. We have live paint sessions every Friday. And then we also have the second Saturday of every month, we have a live 2-hour workshop. And that is with collage, paint, journaling, mark making, etc., and all that jazz. So it's fun because I try to have a mix of all sorts of different things. Then we have the group itself. So I have the Art Life set up in Mighty Networks, and it can be a little challenging if you are used to Facebook and all of the other social media sites out there. But once you get in it and you've spent a few minutes looking at how it's set up and you start using it, it gets easier to navigate. I've gone in, I've started using hashtags, I move things around and set things up in different ways. But I'm going to be posting weekly prompts that you could go through, and there'll be exercises with collage, there'll be exercises with composition, color theory, design, basically all of the fundamentals of art making, that you can take these ideas and and apply them to an abundance of different mediums and ways of thinking. There's painting exercises, journaling exercises. I am a big fan, not just of art journaling, because I know you all know that, but also keeping what I call it's a written journal, it's a studio journal. And I have everything in that book. I write about anything, I write about everything, and I write about my ideas, things I've learned from different artists, and I use it to generate idea making in future artwork. I use it to document my life. So I have all sorts of different prompts. I am putting everything I have into the art life. It's something that I've wanted to be able to do this for a very long time. And it wasn't until the pandemic hit that I basically was forced to do it because I couldn't teach in-person workshops anymore. And so it's almost like my version of an art school. And you have a teacher that you can email me anytime. I'm here for you. If you need a mentor, if you need someone to cheer you on, or if you need advice with a project that you're working on or something. But my thing with art making is that when you go to make art, you make art for yourself, but you also use it to communicate in some way, shape, or form. You're asking questions, you're trying to reach out to other people in some way. You're not just making it solely for your own sake, even though that is a big part of it, but you're also making it for others. And it's a visual language. There's lots of things that we can learn from the work and from sharing it with each other in a community. So before it gets to be 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Anybody have any questions? Anything before I shut the recording off? If not, I anybody? I can't tell. Go like this if you do. If not, all right, I'm gonna shut the recording off. Thank you guys for watching. Um, when we do the live sessions too, they are fun. Sometimes I get a little nervous with stuff like this because you know how it is. But again, I'm here for you. Ask me if you got any questions. And thank you guys for watching. Have a great day. Stay creative. Hopefully I hit the right button. Yada yada yada.